Right, the numbers are slowing down. Let's get started. Hey, welcome everybody back to day 2 of CALIcon. I am the great and powerful master of ceremonies, and you know me because I've got my name badge. So I'll put that on right now. There we go. See? Thanks for coming to back to the second day. I'm going to share my screen and do some simple housekeeping. Oh, I always have to alt tab. There we go. First of all, thanks for coming back. Second, during the sponsor session, during the break, we've got Procertis, Justia talking about the free law and about Justia, I hope. And Greg Sarab in exam 4 presenting, so stick around for that. I have to remind everybody that to use the Q&A feature in Zoom and to update questions. You can drop things in the chat, but they tend to get lost there. If you got a question, put it in the Q&A. We've got staff taking a look there and feeding them to me, as well as I'll be checking that out for the question and answer parts of the session. Don't forget the conversation continues at community.cali.org. There is a link, there is a topic for this session over there. I do believe you have to register. Correct me if I'm wrong, Elmer. And you will be able to get in and continue the conversation. For the speakers, I suggest if you want to basically say, I'll post links or something like that you mentioned, put them there or drop them in the chat as well while things are going on.
John, they just need to use their Cali account to log into the community forums. That's awesome. The one that you use on www.cali.org.
Excellent. Wanted to make sure I got that right. Thanks. So you could also use that to set up your own Zoom meetings. That's not using our Zoom, that's using your own Zoom. If you have a Zoom account, you have a free account, you can set up a meeting with friends to meet during the breaks in a virtual hallway, all right? Don't forget the hashtag is CALIcon20. Although I've seen a lot of people also using CALIcon2020, that's fine. People can find it. Don't forget to follow Cali and me too. We're going to throw the switch on the conference website at 2020.calicon.org. If you want to submit a proposal, we'll turn that into submit a video. So which is to say that if you've got experiences or ideas that you want to share relating to your experience with legal education, pandemic, and tech, continue to do that for the next month or so. We'll leave that open for folks. We've got a couple of surveys, one for students and one for faculty about the pandemic and their experience during spring. So let your students know, let your faculty know. I believe Sarah's just dropped that into the chat as well. And here we go. Let's get started. So in this cluster, the theme is the Pandemic Law Library. We've got 3 sessions. And the first one is The Clock is Ticking, Moving from In-Person to Virtual Reference in a Hurry, Kathleen Darvil and Sue Silverman. After that, quickly followed by Instruction and Collaboration During COVID-19, Creating an Inclusive Environment, Tina Ching, Zanada Joyner, Kelly Leong, George Taoultsides, Mike Martinez, Dennis Prieto, followed by Surviving COVID with the Breakfast Club, Task Management and Communication Tools for Multi-Generational Telework, Rachel Evans, Carol Watson, Geraldine, Kalim, and Wendy Moore. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to the first group.
Okay. So I think we're sharing our screen now.
Yep.
Okay, good.
All right, so good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're staying safe and healthy through all of this. So today, Kathy and I are going to discuss how the library at Brooklyn Law School transitioned to a virtual format with only a week's notice when our governor instituted the stay-at-home orders in response to the COVID pandemic. As you can imagine, this presented some pretty unique challenges to the library. And while some things we were well prepared for, there were other things that we weren't really so prepared for, didn't foresee. And in the future, we hope to be better equipped to handle. And we also hope that this presentation will help others who may also find themselves, unfortunately, in this situation.
So in this presentation, we're first going to go over how we prepared for moving to a virtual format. Then we'll talk about what we did not expect, how we can better prepare for the next time we have to do this in a hurry. And lastly, we will go over some unexpected opportunities that working from home presented to us, not that there are really any upsides to a situation like this. So Sue, let's get started with going over what we were prepared for. Can you go over specifically what challenges the librarians at Brooklyn Law School faced in moving to virtual reference in a hurry?
Yeah, so I think that the challenges we faced could be divided into 4 areas. First, how to actually provide reference services, which we normally provide in person Monday through Saturday. 2, how to provide access to the course books, which many students relied on the library for. 3, ensuring that the entire Brooklyn Law School community had off-campus access to the databases, the subscription databases and websites that they needed. And 4, ensuring that the reference librarians were still able to support the faculty in their research, which meant not only having the capabilities to conduct research, but also making sure that faculty were aware that we are still available to provide the same services virtually as we did in person.
I would like to go over each of those areas you discussed and what the librarians did to prepare. Can you elaborate on what you did to conduct reference services virtually?
Yes, well, luckily we already had some experience with conducting virtual reference once a week, just using an online chat feature and call forwarding and email. So we already had in place a protocol for virtual reference. The challenge was to expand this to all of the reference librarians all the time on very short notice. So to do this, first of all, we had all calls that went to the reference desk, forwarded to the ref desk email, which we all have access to. So that combined with the online chat function and shared email, that gave us all the tools we needed really to work from home. We just had to then adjust our schedule so that each librarian managed the reference 1 full day a week instead of our usual daily 2-hour shifts. That was just to simplify the transition a little bit. We also got rid of the evening and Saturday reference hours to further simplify the transition, and we'll see about bringing those back in the future. But really, perhaps the most important thing that we did was to write everything down in one concise document, which was shared with all of the reference librarians. And we also, importantly, scheduled regular Zoom meetings with each other to check in on each other. So since we could no longer simply just pop into everyone's offices and we lost that mode of communication with each other. So while all in all, we were able to answer reference questions, I will say that not having that casual back and forth conversation with students that you have when you meet face to face, where they might be more comfortable to ask follow-up questions or let us know if maybe the answer we provided is not exactly what they are looking for. That for us was really a big loss, I think, and that's definitely something we want to consider addressing going forward.
Moving on to the next challenge you mentioned, it was providing access to course books. Can you discuss how you prepared to do that?
Yeah, so the Brooklyn Law School Library puts 1 copy of each casebook on reserve, or each required casebook on reserve, so students can check them out for 2-hour increments at the circulation desk. And as you can imagine, this is a hugely popular service that many students used, but during the stay-at-home order, students obviously lost access to this. So we considered scanning the remainder of the pages that students would need to finish up this semester, but given the time pressure we were under, this just didn't seem feasible, and we didn't want to put our staff at risk by making them come in just to complete the scanning. So instead, we reached out to publishers to procure complimentary access to electronic versions of the students' casebooks. And much to our relief, all of the major publishers provided some sort of electronic access to many, maybe even most of their casebooks. In addition, we reached out to Blue Book and obtained 100 free access codes for students to use the electronic Blue Book. And importantly, again, we put all these codes into a shared Google spreadsheet that all of the librarians had access to keep track of who we gave the codes out to.
Great. Next, you mentioned subscription. How did you make sure that the law school community had access remotely to the online databases they needed?
So we do subscribe to several sites and databases that are only available on campus, and anyone who needs to access one of these sites off campus must install a proxy server. And though this is more of an IT issue, the questions regarding how to do this inevitably go to the librarians. So really the issue here was an issue of communication, just making sure that students and faculty knew that A, they had access to subscription sites even off campus, and B, how to access those sites, i.e. how to install the proxy server. So that brings me to our LibGuides, which we put together in a hurry in that week when this whole thing started. So we created 3 LibGuides. One, or first, a LibGuide summarizing all of the services that the library is providing remotely and how to access those services. This included instructions for installing the proxy and also how to access the complimentary electronic course books and Blue Book codes that I mentioned earlier, as well as, of course, reference services. And importantly, we posted this guide prominently on the library's homepage, so it's the first thing that students see when they go to the library's website. And we also shared it on social media. Next, we created a guide for faculty, a faculty resource guide. And this guide contained information on library resources and also tips on using Zoom, since of course they would be teaching their classes on Zoom. And we also included other resources that we thought they might find helpful on remote teaching. And that guide actually got a lot of positive feedback from the faculty. And finally, we created a guide devoted specifically just to coronavirus resources, just to help the BLS community navigate all the news and services that were related to the pandemic.
Now that we went through what we were prepared for, let's talk about some of the challenges that we did not expect.
Yes, so first, and perhaps this shouldn't have been a surprise, we had technological issues. The proxy for some people just didn't work, or it worked sporadically, and even for some of the reference librarians, which that made them unable to timely answer reference questions.
You also mentioned gaining complimentary access to electronic course books. I imagine this wasn't available for all course books, was it?
No, unfortunately, not all course books were available electronically. And one way of dealing with this was really just working with what we had. So trying to find alternative ways of accessing the information that students needed from those books. So, for example, one student's book was simply selected portions of the Internal Revenue Code. So we pointed her to some other federal tax resources online, such as Cheetah, that included the Internal Revenue Code. And I don't know how much that really helped the student, but this is definitely something that we will need to figure out the next time we move to virtual reference.
And of course, none of this was happening in a bubble. I imagine the pandemic itself posed several challenges.
Yeah, it certainly did. It's not fun being the epicenter of a global pandemic. Students and faculty and staff, we all had to work and learn from home while also dealing with the stress of a pandemic weighing down on them, on us, and our families. And this included the financial stress of suddenly losing access to all of the physical resources that the library offered, such as laptops. We had a student whose laptop broke and she didn't know what to do about that, as this was something that the library would typically provide. So we reached out to students through email, virtual reference, and social media, letting them know that they could turn to us with whatever issues they may be facing. And at the very least, we could help them to navigate these challenges by, for example, just pointing them to sources of aid. For example, that student whose laptop broke, we pointed her to the Law School Student Support Fund, or pandemic resources such as the New York City Emergency Management's COVID fund, site. So, Kathy, now that you heard me list all of the issues we faced when transitioning quickly from in-person to virtual reference, do you have any ideas about how maybe we could do this better next time?
I do have a few. And one way to do this is that we really need to just take the time to brainstorm with our entire reference team about what we wish we could do that we were either not able to plan for in the rush to leave, or that we cannot do because we currently do not have the tools or resources available. And now is certainly the time to figure this out while everything is fresh in our minds.
Okay, so going through the specific issues that I raised, what solutions have you found for the issue of student access to course materials?
One solution to the course materials dilemma is at the start of each semester, the library should check which course books are available electronically. We can create a list of the course books that are available and a list of the books that are not available. On the list of books available as ebooks, we should note the publisher contact information so we can quickly contact them for electronic access. For those few classes where the course book is not available as an ebook, we should ask the faculty member for their syllabus at the start of the semester, so that in a time of emergency, we could scan the remaining assigned pages and share those pages with the faculty member for them to post on their course page. Alternatively, we could ask the faculty member in IT for access to their course page, where we could locate the syllabus to identify the pages that need to be scanned. Having these lists would help us ensure that students have access to their course materials if we are required to run the library virtually on short notice.
And have you thought about how we could better prepare for the other difficulties we encountered in transitioning to virtual reference in a hurry? Let's try and tackle these one at a time. So first, how might we overcome that loss of nonverbal communication that I mentioned during the virtual reference interview?
Well, one idea that several libraries have put into place is virtual reference office hours. Students can make appointments with a reference librarian for a video conference on a shared calendar. The calendar could be posted on the library's portal or on the external web page. Other libraries have created a Zoom room that the reference librarians monitor during their work hours. Any student can stop by the Zoom room during those hours for reference support.
Great. And also, what about the loss of library workshops? I didn't mention this, but this was an issue that we encountered. Just before all of this started, we were hosting regular library workshops that were quite successful with the students and helped to market our resources. So how could libraries address this issue?
Well, just like we can hold virtual reference hours using web-based conferencing apps, we could run the library workshops via Zoom or another platform on timely topics. One issue with these workshops is getting the students to attend. For our in-person workshops, we entice them with candy, coffee, and other treats. Obviously, we can't do this virtually, but we could utilize social media and targeted emails to market the workshops.
Okay, and last, but definitely not least, perhaps the most difficult, have you thought about how to prevent the technological difficulties that arose for example, in implementing the proxy instructions?
Well, I believe the proxy instruction issue could have been remedied with routine and periodic checks and tests of the proxy instructions on different browsers from our librarians' home computers and various devices throughout the year. That way we could note any difficulty we were experiencing and remedy the problem immediately or identify a workaround before the crisis hits.
Great, thank you. So do you have any other suggestions for how to prepare for the next crisis?
One impediment that we faced was the lack of access to the library's physical collection. We could have an emergency fund to obtain ebook versions of books that we own that faculty and students need access to. We can also proactively reach out to publishers about increasing access to e-versions of books for our patrons during future pause orders, or loosening their licensing restrictions to allow for interlibrary loans of ebooks and journal articles. Another suggestion we want to put in place next time is to make sure that we're serving all our patron groups. We should not forget to offer our services to other law school departments. We should inquire if staff need any research or technical support during this time, such as ensuring everyone knows how to implement the proxy server and that it's working for them.
Okay, so shifting gears a little bit here, while this has definitely been a really challenging time and not one that I ever want to have to go through again, have you discovered any unexpected, perhaps, upsides to all of this?
Well, this disease has unfortunately permeated all aspects of our professional and personal lives, upending nearly everything, including our work serving our patrons. But if we choose to be thoughtful in our response and actions, we can most certainly learn from this experience and use the time to make improvements to library policies, procedures, and services so that when the next crisis hits, we'll be ready. For example, we could analyze our day-to-day duties. And in doing so, our library realized that we do not have procedural manuals for many of the tasks our staff perform. Most of our library staff have been with the school for many years. If they were to retire or take a new job, the library would have a very difficult time filling their shoes. So one project we identified was for each staff member to create an internal procedural manual for their daily duties. This has been a very useful project for staff to work on, especially those who may not be able to complete all their day-to-day duties remotely. Librarians as a team can also use this time to update our policies. We can form teams to think about what is best for our library and our patrons. We can research other institutions' policies and identify the best one for us. One new policy manual that we can, and one of our team members is creating, is a manual for remote work best practices. Another unexpected upside is getting to the bottom of that to-do list. If you're like me, there are many things at the bottom of the list that just seem to stay there. And now really is a great time to tackle these tasks that forever sit at the bottom. Whenever we rush to do something, we will undoubtedly make mistakes and encounter obstacles. But there are things we can learn from our current situation so that we are better prepared next time. If we create new policies, practices, and procedures, we will be better able to anticipate the problems that a future crisis may create. Thank you for listening to us, and we look forward to your comments.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And our next presenter, I believe it's a video. Am I wrong? Instruction and collaboration during COVID, creating an inclusive environment. Tina, Zanada, Kelly, George, Mike, and Dennis. Yeah, that's a video.
It sure is.
So it's up to, we're waiting for Tobias to play the video. There we go.
Thank you. And while we're waiting, I just want to preface this by saying we did record this a couple weeks ago. Hi, my name is Tina Ching. I'm at the University of Oregon in Eugene, Oregon.
Hi, my name is Zanada, Joyner. I'm a reference librarian at North Carolina Central University School of Law Library in Durham, North Carolina.
Hi, I'm Kelly Leong. I'm the head of reference at Fordham University's Maloney Library in New York City, New York, and I am currently in Manhattan.
I'm Mike Martinez, the Deputy Director of Administration and Professor at the Sarita Kennedy East Law Library at St. Mary's University School of Law. I'm currently in San Antonio, Texas, but that's where we're at.
I'm Dennis Prieto. I'm one of the reference librarians at the Rutgers School of Law in Newark. I'm currently at my home in Trenton here. And I'm glad to be here.
I'm George Taoultsides. I'm the manager of faculty research and scholarly support at Harvard Law School Library in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
So why don't we get started? Let's talk about strategies for managing uncertainty.
And I've got a good question for you, Mike. You guys are getting ready to open up. How are you feeling about that?
So I feel like it's there's a lot of measured anxiety primarily. There's not a lot of information being disseminated from administration to any of the individuals, and I guess what fancy word would be stakeholders of the institution as a whole. I know that students are chomping at the bit to try to figure out what it's going to look like in a live format, if there is going to be one. And I know that there's a lot of discussions being held as to what even the fall semester would look like. So I think the biggest thing, anxiety.
In terms of some of the notes that I had jotted down, I was just struck by this one idea. I heard the writer Gia Tolentino on NPR. She had just talking about being productive during, this time. And she said, there's no way in hell I'm reading Proust right now. And I just thought that makes perfect sense to me. One of the things that I don't really want to be doing right now is coming up with world, renowned, advanced, groundbreaking new methods. That seems like a bad thing to do. Seems like not a way to help manage the anxiety of our students.
Right.
And that's a lot of it, right? Because we kind of have to, we're in a double bind too. We're not only not sure of what's going on, we also have people looking to us saying, well, what's going on?
Right.
I think the strategy is to hunker down and to do what you know how to do, right? Which is provide instruction. One thing that I think is really important for instructors right now, especially since classes are online or hybrid, or there's a mixture of ways the message can get interrupted, is if there's something that is really important that you think your students need to know, you want to make sure that you give it to them in 3 different methods. An email, put it at the top of the syllabus, put it on the Canvas page or something like that, right? Or some kind of separate reminder. Now is not the time to be watching the clock and telling students, oh, look, here, you're 15 seconds late on this deadline.
Right.
Now you've got to be, right? That kind of grading doesn't work in these times, I think.
And I think it changes the modalities of how we deliver it and the expectations of what we have, right? And I think that it's a time to be more open about things. Because as we're, used to classes in school being run on particular modules, like if you're teaching an online class for us in an MJER program, it comes out on a Wednesday, so it's Wednesday to Tuesday night. Mm-hmm. And so maybe there's more of an expansion of it in terms of the hours involved. Because you also have to take into consideration what people have, what they're doing, what their family situation is, what their electronic resources availability, online status. Those are things that you have to think about. And I think that it allows for opportunity to become more partners with them, students and instructor, sort of collaborating and working together in order to kind of hit to that common goal. Now it's not the time to be the deified professor, right? It's the time to be sort of on level with them.
And helping them manage what they're working through too, at least in terms of the class.
Right.
At the very least, in terms of the class. Right. We're all coming from this from a crazy number of perspectives with a variety of things working. But the way, as long, I think right now, teaching in a pandemic requires being extraordinarily kind.
I think that is such a great sentiment to focus on, and focusing on our students is really important. I wonder if we should start discussing our students' needs and how to overcome their technological obstacles during this time.
So I know for me, and in the workplace setting, I have 2 reference librarians that realize their home computers, which they don't really use because we're used to our nice big desktops at work, aren't really up to snuff when it comes to teaching their classes and having a video and audio feed. And it's just not working well for them. And then another librarian's having problems with bandwidth issues, which dovetails right into my classes where I had students where they had to turn off their video because it was causing so many problems when it came to bandwidth. Zanada, do you have anything?
Yeah, so Kelly and I did talk about some of this, and it's a multi-pronged technology consideration. There's the hardware, the literal hardware. That do you have the equipment on hand? Can you lend it out? Do you have it to borrow? Can you share? There's the bandwidth issues and connectivity issues, but then there's also software issues that we've run into with our institution. It's also the connectivity across different platforms. And that has been something that we're all learning more. I mean, we always hear our stakeholders asking for more Mac, and then we're in a PC world in our workplace, and then people go home and they have what they have. And it has been very exposing of like how we're not necessarily working on the same ecosystem. And so I would imagine if we couple that to lack of access, that and some of those issues, those equity issues that are always circling around us, now we really have to drill down and figure out how to make this the most inclusive situation for our staff, for our students, for our stakeholders, for the continuity of our programming. So it's been very interesting and not easy, and there's not easy solutions to this too.
Yeah, so looking down into the future of instruction in the fall, we don't know what will happen. And I think we really do have to start discussing these issues for our students' sake, because there are some equity issues involved. I think particularly when we talk about software in my geographic setting, I think bandwidth is definitely a much different discussion when you're outside of really urban areas, because we're seeing connectivity issues across our student base, from affluent communities to less affluent communities. That doesn't seem to be a determining factor. But with hardware, right, a really good PC that can handle doing all these things might cost more, potentially, right? So that's something we have to think about our students. Are we going to lend these things out? And then how do we lend them out physically when we're not in the building? Mm-hmm. And then also another thing that's been coming up is, portable Wi-Fi hotspots. So what are we doing with those? Are we going to give those out to students if they are having connectivity issues? Are we going to give that out to staff?
Those are really some interesting complicating factors that sometimes we don't focus on. And it brings me back to what Dennis and Mike were saying is, I mean, I tell this story all the time, but I was in law school in New Orleans when Katrina hit my second year, and we transferred to the University of Houston's campus, but there were a lot of coping situations. So people said, well, you have your books and it's not that cold, so you don't need a coat. And you don't know where and when people enter this space right now. A lot of assumptions can be made about choices, but we really have to be sensitive to the fact that we don't know, because you just don't know. You don't know what's going on in someone's home. So privacy is something we've been thinking about. So we've been using Teams to do our calls because it's a more secure system, we're told. But again, we don't know who has a situation at home that's not safe, or who's losing. Someone is going to lose if we're not careful about how we move forward. And technology is a very, really tangible example, and there are reasons why people would be uncomfortable with different things. And I think, unfortunately, it's a broad brush for a very delicate situation sometimes. So
all these are great factors to consider and are very important to make sure that all of our students feel safe and secure, right? And I'm glad you brought up Teams. We're using Teams a lot as well, but I know George's team has been using Zoom as far as an online tool to communicate, or not Zoom, I'm sorry. What is it? Slack. Yeah. Slack. George's team has been using.
They're all the same.
Yeah. Well, they're not, right? And I think it'd be really great to hear a little bit more about how you all have been using Slack and how it's been a tool that's really worked for you and your team.
So we've had Slack at the Harvard Law School Library for probably 3 or 4 years, but we haven't been using it as a whole within the organization up until the quarantine these past couple of months. So this quarantine has allowed us within the library to decide on one platform to use, and we've decided to use Slack. And it's worked out, I think, for the best. I think I would call Slack a mashup between email and Facebook. So the two things that most people hate. But it comes out as actually a really positive experience. I think they take the best of email and Facebook and put it in a corporate type of environment, but it's not so corporate where it feels stilted. There's hundreds of emotes that you can use, smiley faces, hearts, etc. And when you start seeing that from the executive director in your organization and everyone else within the library, then you get a more familial experience, which I think is what we're looking at, or what I prefer within an organization. Some of the cons of Slack are, again, as Tina mentioned, there's so many software platforms to use right now. You can use Microsoft Teams. That's something that I was using in the past. For project management, I use Trello. So having to learn Trello, having to learn Slack, Microsoft Teams, email, Zoom now for everyone, it's time consuming and confusing.
George, does anyone in your institution worry about there being too many platforms?
Yeah, we do. And right now we're confused. Harvard's confused. So I think the official software that people are asked to use is Microsoft Teams. And at the university level, yes, but what we've heard from IT and others is that, well, most people are using Slack, even though it's the unofficial version. I think that's one of the reasons why we're not even paying for Slack at this point in time.
So it's funny you said that, George, because in our institution, we're using Teams, but Teams can add the app of Slack onto it. And you can, right. So we're kind of pushed to Teams, but there are people still adding Slack to their Teams interface. So they're really using Slack. And then you can add the Trello boards too. And then there's a lot of more productivity tools. And it makes me wonder about what Dennis was saying. Is it even realistic to expect that, adding, I don't know, I just feel like adding more tools is not going to change the fact that we're all really just not sure what we're navigating through anyway. I mean, you're just kind of dealing with this day by day. So I don't think countdowns and space races and balloons and I don't know. I just don't know if that's going to improve productivity right now, but it's available.
Yeah, that's a great point. And even, once this quarantine lessens, once we start going back to the office, what role will Slack play? What role will Microsoft Teams play within that ecosystem? We still don't know. And again, I don't think we found a winner yet. I don't think society, like Google has won the search engine race and Facebook social media race. What is going to be this, who's going to win this ecosystem race? We still don't know.
I think it'll just be super interesting to see how we come out of this on the other side with all the things we've talked about, dealing with anxiety in the workplace, dealing with technological issues we hadn't really thought about in great detail because it wasn't necessary, and now it's necessary. And then what kind of optional communication tools have we been forced into that we can bring back and will hopefully improve our spaces? There's a lot to unpack there. Hopefully there'll be some good things that come out of it.
And then also respect to the new changing modalities of work. It's sort of, as we see things going on, and, I think this will definitely emulate what's happening out there. So as we're trying to show students what the changing modalities of work are, for us, but what it will be for them within practice and things like that, I think those are good things to sort of look at.
Yeah, and I think so too.
Mike, that's a whole nother program.
Yeah, that's true.
Do this program first.
I was thinking too about, I heard from a friend who's visually impaired and who's really enjoying working from home with a lot of these different products because they have some of the accessibility built into them or it's been developed to. Visual impairments, hearing impairments, all kinds of different things, anxiety in the workplace. It just seems like thinking about the future and what we do with these tools. But for some people in our communities, whether they're saying it or not, this really has been a very beneficial time for them as far as being able to connect across the ecosystem of the workplace.
That was great. Thank you very much. And thank you for condensing a 40-minute conversation down to fit into our time slots here. All right, our next speakers, surviving COVID with the Breakfast Club, Rachel, Carol, Geraldine, and Wendy. The floor is yours.
Thank you for joining us today. As he introduced our title, Surviving COVID with the Breakfast Club, this session is going to be very much themed around some of the movies that we feel like really present our different generations of those of us that are speaking. And alongside that, we're going to talk about why our library chose some of the tools that we're using for task management and communication in this weird time of COVID where we're all teleworking and we're having to multitask and communicate with each other. So for our overview, I'm going to introduce the team and sort of what generational roles we play. And then the planning, Carol will explain all of our planning and our timeline. And then we'll each get into the tools that the three of us, Wendy, Geraldine, and myself, help to implement and are kind of driving for the library. And at the end, we'll talk about how this has been received by our coworkers. So to introduce ourselves, I'm Rachel Evans, the Metadata Services and Special Collections Librarian here at UGA Law Library, and I am one of the millennials on this call.
Hi, I'm Geraldine Kalim. I am our Student Services Librarian, and I am also a millennial.
Hi, I'm Wendy Moore. I'm the Associate Director for Collection Services and Team Gen X.
And I'm Carol Watson, the Director of the Law Library, and I'm the baby boomer of the group. You know, the baby boomers were the ones who are known for being hardworking, disciplined, ambitious, goal-centered.
Okay, boomer, okay.
So when we were brainstorming ideas and movie themes, Rachel was wondering what movie would represent the baby boomers, and Wendy told her The Big Chill. And Rachel was surprised when she asked me what was the movie that represented my generation, and I said, without hesitation, The Big Chill. So for those of you who don't know the movie, it's a weekend with friends who knew one another a short period back in college a long time ago, and it involves a lot of introspection and romanticized past, and it often gets held up as an example of the self-absorption of baby boomers. But what is overlooked is the fact that The Big Chill extolled the benefits of a network of friends, which coincidentally is the theme of this presentation, how to harness your network. So here's how it all went down with us. As luck would have it, on February 27th, Geraldine and Rachel had given a conference presentation on collaborative tools at the University of Georgia. It was a Women in Higher Education conference. And shortly thereafter, on March 9th, we began our serious COVID planning. I look back for this presentation at my notes, and ironically, what I have written on March 9th is, there is no, and I have no bolded and underlined, immediate crisis, but advanced preparation can help us prevent a last-minute scramble. So we began our study planning that Monday, and I was managing a lot of roles. I was trying to figure out what the home setups were for everyone, what tasks we could do off-site, what we could do virtually with our services. So it was natural that I would turn to Geraldine and Rachel and ask them to pick and implement our collaboration tools. A few days later, fast forward 5 days, March 13th, that last-minute scramble began. And our universe changed as it did for many of you. And I don't think any of us in our library will ever forget we had a final meeting that day, sitting 12 feet apart, not 6 feet apart, in an open area in our reading room. And that was really the last time we were all together. And although we had selected our tools for collaboration, we had not fully implemented how it was going to look on the ground. So once we switched to online, Rachel had to then follow up and lead some online training for some of these tools. But we want to note in our timeline, one of our most important milestones with these tools was that a week later, March 20th, we held our first of our weekly TGI Out Friday happy hours. And this is the glue that has held us all together. I think at noon on Fridays, we all begin counting down and watching the clock for our TGI Out Zoom happy hour. So you have seen that these are the 3 tools we have selected. So let's hear more about the implementation, what worked and what didn't.
So one of the movies that really had an impact on us millennials in our formative years was Scream, which was the first meta horror film. And this is a picture of what we look like as millennials when you call us on the phone. Our love of new technology combined with our love of communicating without interrupting is probably a large part of why we love Trello so much. We identified Trello as a good candidate for our library because some of us were already using it. We thought there was less of a learning curve than some of the competitors of Trello. And it's great for teams And at our library, we operate quite a bit in different team environments. So this slide shows some of the examples of ways that we organize ourselves into teams. We work in departments, we work cross-departmentally, and we also work in more temporary task-based teams. So at any moment, each of us could be on multiple teams at one time. So this slide shows some examples of how we're using Trello right now. Our public relations team uses it for blog workflow purposes, and we keep track of our ideas there. Also, Carol and our associate directors can use Trello to determine and then also see who's working on which tasks and projects and what the due dates of those tasks are. I think relying on Trello during this time of telework has helped me realize how great it is for sharing information that might be changing rapidly, and also how great it is at for sharing a variety of resources with a group of people. Another thing that people really love about Trello is that it integrates with other platforms, and one of those is Slack, which Rachel is going to tell us a little bit more about.
So Slack helps us chat like hackers. This was one of my favorite movies. It still is one of my favorite movies. And I feel like a lot of the people in the workplace, when we realize that we all like this film, then we can't stop talking about the film, and it's a great soundtrack. And so, but Slack seriously helps me feel like the kind of person that I wanted to be when I would see these movies growing up that were younger people who were really excited and really able to use technology to their advantage. And I think that goes back to the integration aspect of Slack, is that it's one of those platforms that you can sort of use it as a home base, and you can send out command lines to all sorts of apps. And so that's how I've used it, and I've tried to encourage some other people to use it that way so that they don't get overwhelmed by all the tools we're using. You know, pick your favorite one and sort of use it as a home base. I will say that when we started, right before that final meeting, the day before the major final meeting, Geraldine and I sat down to talk about which tool to kind of roll out first, you know, and we talked about Trello. And I really thought that Slack would have a higher learning curve for people than it has, but it has been well adapted very rapidly by everyone in the library. And it has really surprised me how much fun people are having there. So the last session really referred to this as kind of being an extension of like your own private social media, right? It kind of is. And we're having a lot of fun, I think, using those types of tools. So sharing GIFs. A lot of our channels are serious business, but some of them are just a really fun place to keep that community going. And we're all under a lot of stress right now. So very early on, one of the first channels we created was an anxiety primal scream zone channel. And that's where you'll find a lot of GIFs where people are like reacting, you know, just to their coworkers about current events or whatever message came most recently from the university system. And then we also have some really, really serious business channels. So one of the screenshots on this this slide is from our collection services department channel, where I'm often, when I come into the building, I've taken photos of objects like books or an office space that needs to be cleaned out so that I can then share those in the Slack channel, and everyone in our department can see them and use them so that they can keep doing their work effectively from home. And, you know, going back again to how wonderful it's been to integrate with other platforms, it integrates wonderfully with Outlook, OneDrive, Google Drive, and also Zoom.
So Gen Xers have known for a long time that reality bites. We luckily have been training our whole lives for this pandemic situation. We grew up spending lots of time alone with minimal entertainment options. Recessions have just always been crushing our plans. And we're good at kind of bridging that cultural divide between the boomers and the millennials. We kind of understand about half of what each of them are talking about. And we also just know that it's good to be laid back and see what happens about things, you know, or whatever. So just like the Breakfast Club, none of us really wanted to be in this situation, right? Where we're using Zoom to primarily communicate with our coworkers. But we've been trying to make the best of it. The University of Georgia Law Library really prides itself on our collaborative environment. So we have a lot of teams and a lot of project groups that work across departments. And so we knew we were going to need a lot of face-to-face time in order to keep the work of the library really moving forward and also meet the needs of our users. So in addition to having, kind of traditional meetings among departments or with, supervisors and supervisees and staff meetings, we also began using Zoom to really encourage social interaction and community building. So as Carol mentioned, we started right away having TGIF gatherings for the library and IT staff. And at these, we've been sharing stories. We've had some celebrations. Geraldine even gave us a tour of her new house. And then we've also used it to host events for students. So we had a virtual reading room study hall sessions that we offered on several Fridays during the remainder of the school year. And we also offered virtual pet therapy during finals. So those were really fun sessions, even featured a pet cockroach once. But overall, Zoom's been very, fairly successful for us, but there are, of course, limitations and challenges. Zoom fatigue is real, right? And of course, accessibility issues from a variety of fronts. There's been issues with Wi-Fi and data speeds among our librarians and staff, lots of drop connections occasionally. I don't think I've yet been in a meeting with Rachel where she hasn't like frozen solid and then we just kind of talk about her while, we wait for her to unfreeze. But we also have had like issues with hardware tech setup. We used actually porch drop-offs to get staff and librarians the tools that they needed at home so that they would be able to participate fully. So we dropped off laptops, webcams, microphones, hotspots, and really tried to make it work and be as inclusive as we could for people. And of course, Zoom always offers all of your, can feature your, home coworkers, such as cats, spouses, kids, whatever, kind of appear unexpectedly. But overall, our experience has been very positive, and it really has kept us really connected during this difficult time.
And I'm going to wrap things up with some of these statistics. I feel like the data kind of speaks for itself, but it can be a little misleading. So starting off with what we just talked about, Zoom has by far actually been the most accepted by all of the people in the library, staff, librarians, every department. We've had some calls where we've had every single person join in. And usually those are the really, really fun ones, right? The ones we're having every Friday afternoon where we can kind of let off steam and actually see another human being when most of us have been spending so much time indoors. And Slack is second. We've got 23 channels at this point, and they're all public channels, but direct messages have actually been surprisingly popular. So actually like 67% of our messaging that's going on in Slack is in direct messages where we're asking the types of questions like, I got a reference question and I don't know the answer, but I'm the one working virtual reference. I can't just pop into Wendy's door 2 doors down because we're not in the building, but I can Slack her and ask her about this resource. So I think Slack has, again, it's really surprised us, and we've had 22 people join it at our library. And then 16 on Trello, and weekly the activity has been on average 7 people posting. But that's the one that's a little misleading, because Trello is the place where we're keeping resources and documents and we're kind of monitoring big projects. It's not where the real-time communication is happening. So those 7 weekly active members are largely made up of Carol, who's our director and kind of leading these plans, and then the associate directors that we have 3 of. And they are, assigning things to different people and checking the boxes and then archiving content when it's finished in Trello, so we can kind of keep track of things in one place. And yes, to our final slide, we wanted to thank you for listening to our session. It has been wonderful.
Thank you very much. That was fantastic. And we've got lots of interesting questions. Folks will probably go a few minutes past the hour for this because I do want to get these questions in. So right away, the top question is, so what about the fall? Do you have thoughts about what to do for the fall? Publishers have been generous about making their coursework available, in the spring, but do you think, how's that going to go for later? And what about using free resources like Cali?
So we believe, because we've contacted publishers, we're actually having summer school at Brooklyn Law School right now virtually, and they will not extend their access. They, I think they just did it because students had their books at home. They already bought the book, so they extended the access, but they're not going to do it in the fall. We've also reached out about getting a site-wide license for some of these ebooks and course books, but they are prohibitively expensive. So if we are, virtual in the fall, which we may be, we've just been telling students that they're going to have to get the book, unfortunately. We have encouraged faculty to use free resources, to use Cali's application, but unfortunately a lot of them also write the books they use in their class, so somewhat of a conflict.
Sure.
But
sure.
We haven't really had so much buy-in, but that's what we have been encouraging them to do.
Great. Another question, and this is, so you talked about virtual reference, and actually you talked about an awful lot of things that you had to do for your communities. And I think this question is coming from, what if you went meta on some of those things, which is to say, if you could share the load of virtual reference between a group of law libraries, or share the load even on sort of an internet library loan sort of thing. In other words, if you don't have enough copies of a book, do other places have them? I know I'm kind of hand waving about this, but any thoughts on sort of a consortium level solution to some of these online reference support problems? Nobody wants to jump at that.
Thinking about just the licensing and so interlibrary loans is an example of that, but the licensing restrictions prevent us from licensing a lot of that content.
Of course.
Content. So we'd have to really, as a group, maybe in a meta level, talk to the publishers and get them to loosen some of these restrictions that they've imposed. But I don't know about the likelihood of that happening, but there is power in voices, as we see on our streets. So, maybe we could get that together. It's a great idea.
What about something like Reference Desk, where you could have a central place where questions could come in, and there could be librarians from different schools staffing to pick them up, and that would help people, with the goofy calendars, or people who are sick, or other things like that. I don't know. I'm curating the question a little bit, trying to turn it into something that you can talk about.
So I would say that the bigger opportunity here is for us to push OER materials harder and to work collectively to get all of our faculty, get it all in one place. And I know that Cali has some resources for that. And so to me, that's our big opportunity, low-hanging fruit, because casebooks are the thing that we're struggling with, or how to provide access to our students.
Yep. All right.
There are conversations going on about controlled digital lending right now that are things that we can all try and participate in. So.
Yeah,
Well,
the Internet Archive's going to be sued.
Yeah, they already
They have
are,
been sued already.
and we're terrified to go into that CDL model. There's no way our general counsel is going to sign off on that with IA having been sued.
Yep. All right, a more practical question. How is Slack? I'm familiar with Slack, but I have a feeling there's quite a group of people among the 300 attendees who don't know, who aren't familiar with it. How is it better than emailing someone? Why not just use email? Don't we already have a communication system?
I would love to jump in on this one. So the reason that I prefer using Slack to email isn't that I'm not still using email, but that when this shift hit, our email inboxes went through the roof. We were getting more things from vendors. We were getting more things from our colleagues. We were getting more things from people that, organizations, professional organizations. There was a lot of programming that went up. There was a whole lot of like free webinars. So the inbox just went up, and it got a little unruly really rapidly just in those first few days, even before our closure. And so I think that was a part of the overwhelm that people felt, was that I can't get through my inbox, don't send me another email. And we feared that the emails would either get missed, or it would just be too difficult of a task for people to get to what really mattered, because there was so much to wade through. So I think Slack, it served the same purpose that email can sometimes, but it's not always a replacement. So if something is really important and we need to make sure we have like an official record of it, that's not a conversation that's going to be an email. But if it's a quick chat, like the question of access for a patron who needs it right away, then that's going to be Slacked. Or if it's a matter of just sharing your feelings about something that you can only express in GIF form, then that's going to be in Slack too.
Yep. We moved all of our internal staff emails essentially to Slack, and that greatly reduced the amount of email traffic we were getting at Cali. Works great for us, but we're a team of 10 or 11. I suspect when you're a team of 20 or 30 or 40, it can get overwhelming even on Slack.
Plus, people do need to remember to check Slack, which I just like to throw in.
Oh, did you just send me something in Slack? Oh, yeah. I have notifications turned off, Elmer.
Yeah. But
This is a great question. Zoom used for work-related meetings and teaching. Are people really going to want to use it? And this is from Dion Gonder Stanley. Are people really going to want to use it for social space? I mean, isn't there Zoom fatigue? And yet you're saying, well, and now let's have some fun on this business communication system.
So I would honestly like to ask Wendy Moore to answer, because she has done like an amazing job of curating themes and enticing people to come to our Zooms.
I think that the difference there is that there is some Zoom fatigue, right, of just, staring at a screen and, some of those things. But I think that there's more meeting fatigue, right? And some of that's no different than if you had 3 or 4 in-person meetings scheduled during the course of a day, right? That wears us all out when we're together anyway. So I think it is a matter of kind of setting a different tone for it, finding different ways to interact. We've made use of the breakout rooms sometimes with our TGIF thing, and to give people little smaller groups where they could have more one-on-one conversations like they would in the hallway at work. So I think that is it a long-term solution for socialization? I don't know. Had a great Mother's Day Zoom with my family, right? And it went on for 2.5 hours. So we all ate dinner, it was, so I don't know, could be the future, I suppose, but we're all gonna have to look better. Yeah, Mike.
I used mine when I had my class as we were trying to gather towards the end of the semester. I usually have a traditional meetup with my students at the end of it all. And so I use it so that we can kind of get together, but also I did it because I wanted to sort of check in with them, right? Because they were relocating everywhere. They were going back to Dallas and Houston and other states and everything else. And I really wanted to do it to sort of check in with them, because what I did find was, people were getting sort of caught off guard by, we were using Zoom in a synchronous format. So the live classes, I teach a course that's asynchronous. So I liked Zoom for my one-on-ones with people because it allowed them to sort of meet with me. We could talk about their papers, but I used it for the live class to sort of check in, because I wasn't sure if people's home situations were going to allow them to view my class at the scheduled time, you know, from 3 to 4:30 on a particular day. So I made sure to like have a video of what I needed to give so they could have that kind of information, and then sort of check in with them and sort of have more of a personal kind of thing. So that's kind of how I used it. But yeah, Zoom fatigue real. Zanada.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, so within our own professional network, so I'm definitely a person that does not want to talk on the phone. I don't want to do video chat. So Zoom fatigue is real, like Wendy said, but what we started doing is using our Teams, and I guess you could do it in Slack or in a lot of other different ecosystems, but we started doing like, what's the word, like professional, like camaraderie type things. So we did a recipe collection one week. We did post a picture of where you'd like to travel after this all ends. We did, our director did a playlist and we all added songs and she put it on Spotify. So we were trying to think of something, and that works better for me personally because I don't want to meet at a time. And so and that's kind of the hard thing about being home. And we know that people have different people in their home and different responsibilities. And it's just hard to be here at 5 o'clock. So that helped me.
Kelly, you have the last say.
Oh, I got the last say. So another thing, kind of riffing off Zanada, is that we have G Suite. So we also have G Chat at Fordham, and we have an entire chat dedicated to our pets. And it is, it is also, it's just with, right now it only has a few people in it, but if anybody at Fordham that's on here wants to join, we'll add you. It's just us posting pictures of our animals doing things around, like throughout the day. Today's was a cat that was found sleeping on top of the Blue Book. So we just, whatever it is, some of us have cats, some of us have dogs. It's asynchronous though, in a sense, right? No one has to be there to enjoy that in that moment. You can come back to it later. You're not constantly on a Zoom call. We have done some happy hours with some of the reference people, and it's been going well. I think it also just depends on the dynamics of your group, whether or not that's viewed as, oh, just another meeting, another Zoom call I have to sit on, or not, or it's more of a social endeavor.
Cool. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it probably helps that our happy hour Zooms start around 4:30 as opposed to 5 o'clock. So people are like, yeah, sure, I'll join.
Great. Actually, I'm going to steal the last note, because I dropped an Insta poll at the during the first presentation asking about the idea of law librarians signing up for of sharing resources in COVID between and among, and whether people would find that useful. Of course, it's a silly question. Yeah, people would find more sharing useful by a 94% margin. But I wanted to just share that because I know that I provide that, I ask people to respond to that poll. Folks, thank you very much. That was fantastic. I know we made you condense what you had to say into 15 minutes each, for each of those presentations, but I feel like you did it. It worked very well. I've learned a lot, and let's all end here. Thank you very much. And we'll see you at the next session, the sponsor sessions. Bye-bye.